I wore my best skirt, answered every question right. And then he asked, "Are you married?" That's the moment the job disappeared and a different life began. I've never told anyone this story before. Not my husband, not my children, not even my sister, and we used to share secrets like breath when we were little. But some memories don't ask for company until you're old enough to understand what they really were. This happened in the spring of 1956. I was 23 years old, newly married, and I almost got a job that would have changed everything. It started with a newspaper clipping. My father brought it home, folded neatly into the corner of the paper like it was afraid to speak too loudly. I still remember the smell of ink and onions on his coat when he handed it to me at the kitchen table. He said, "You're good with numbers. You should try." It was a listing from a firm in the city, Miller, Watkins & Rowe. An expanding company looking for analytical minds with strong attention to detail. The ad never said men only, which was rare for those days. So I thought, maybe. I'd always been good with numbers. Not in a dry, dusty way. More like, numbers made the world make sense. Like notes in a song you could follow when words failed. I balanced budgets for my high school, tutored boys in algebra who never remembered to bring pencils, and I loved the clean logic of ledgers and columns. But I was also a wife now, 3 months into marriage. And back then, that mattered. Still, I wrote the letter. Typed it twice. My husband, Robert, didn't say much. Just looked up from his toast and said, "You sure?" I said I was. And that was that. A week later, a letter arrived, cream-colored envelope, thick paper. They'd like me to come for an interview. I still have the outfit I wore that day. A navy blue skirt, just below the knee. White blouse, pressed so crisp I can still feel the starch. I borrowed a pair of black heels from my neighbor, half a size too big, but they made the right sound on tile floors. I even wore gloves. Pale yellow. Matched the little bow on my purse. I left the house before dawn and rode the train into the city. First time I'd ever done that alone. I clutched my bag like it had the answer inside it. Their building was tall and gray and self-important. The lobby echoed. The elevators had brass doors and an attendant in a hat. The receptionist greeted me with polite confusion. She'd clearly been expecting someone else. But she recovered, and after a few moments, a man in a light gray suit came out to meet me. His name was Mr. Donnelly. He smiled the whole time he shook my hand, not unkindly, but the way someone smiles when they're trying to solve a riddle that makes them uncomfortable. We sat in a room with tall windows and a long oak table. He asked about my schooling. I told him I graduated third in my class, handled finances for our church, and had a perfect record in shorthand. I watched his eyebrows lift a little with each answer. He gave me a test, numbers, patterns, sequences. I flew through it. He seemed surprised, almost amused. "You're very capable," he said, tapping the results with his pen. "More than most of the boys we've seen." I smiled. I didn't know what to say to that, whether it was praise or warning. Then came the question. "Are you married, miss?" He paused, then corrected himself, "Mrs." I nodded. "Yes, sir. Just recently." His expression didn't change, but something behind it did, like a door quietly closing in the back of his mind. He cleared his throat and stood. "Well, we appreciate your time. You'll hear from us." He didn't shake my hand on the way out. I never heard from them again. No call. No letter. Not even a form rejection. It wasn't until years later, when I met a woman who used to work in that office, that I learned what likely happened. She told me, "Oh, they never hired married women. Said they'd train you and then lose you to motherhood." Mr. Donnelly was famous for it. I laughed when she told me, not out of humor, but because I'd already cried enough about it in secret. I didn't tell Robert. I didn't want to hear "I told you so," or worse, it wouldn't have worked anyway. He meant well, but his love had limits. It didn't always stretch to dreams he couldn't see himself in. Instead, I took a job shelving books at the town library. I learned to catalog, to mend pages, to breathe in the dust of other people's stories. And I liked it mostly. It was quiet, useful, but I kept that blue skirt. And every time I opened the closet and saw it, a little piece of me stood up straighter, not because of what I became, but because of what I almost became. I had children, raised a family, loved deeply, fought fairly, buried my husband when the time came. I've lived a full life. But every once in a while, when I see an office window lit up late at night, or when I balance my checkbook and still smile at the numbers, I think of that interview, of the silence that came after, of the door that didn't quite shut, but never opened. People think regrets are loud, that they stomp and shout and keep you up at night. But the ones that stay the longest? They're quiet. They live in the shape of a skirt you never threw away, in a letter you wrote but never mailed, in a job you almost took. After the interview, I folded the skirt and placed it at the back of the closet. Didn't throw it away. Didn't wear it again. It stayed there through 4 moves, 3 pregnancies, 2 job changes, and 1,000 ordinary afternoons. Always quietly hanging. Always reminding me. Not of failure. Not exactly. Just of the almost. Robert never asked how it went. He saw the silence in my face that evening and decided not to prod it. That was how we were, not cold, not distant, but careful. Like 2 dancers with different songs in their heads, trying not to step on each other's toes. I didn't resent him. Not really. He was a good man in most of the ways that matter. Worked hard. Provided. Mowed the lawn on Saturdays. But he came from a world where ambition in women made people nervous. To him, a wife working outside the home was something to be done only when money got tight, like fixing the roof after a storm. Necessary, maybe, but nothing to be proud of. So when I took the library job, I told him it was just for the summers. Then, just until the kids were older. Then, just because they needed someone reliable. 27 years later, I retired from that same library. I was good at it. More than good. I reorganized the entire system, digitized the card files before anyone asked me to, and trained 3 generations of assistants who thought I had an answer for everything. And yet, not one of them ever knew about Miller, Watkins, and Rowe. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I had told them. If I had said, I almost worked in a high-rise office, crunching numbers before computers could do it faster. If I had said, I was told no not because I wasn't good enough, but because I wore a wedding ring. Maybe they would have seen me differently. Maybe I would have seen myself differently. But I think part of me kept that secret because I didn't want to explain the feeling of being disqualified before you even begin. It's a quiet kind of hurt. Like reaching for a door you didn't realize was locked. Motherhood filled many of the spaces that ambition had left behind. And I don't say that like it's a consolation prize, it's not. Raising my children was the deepest, hardest, most transformative work I ever did. But there were moments, late at night, when the house finally fell still, when I'd sit with a cup of tea and a ledger open beside me. Yes, I still kept ledgers, and I'd wonder, who would I have been if I'd walked into a different building that day? If my name had gone on a brass plaque? If someone had seen what I could do, not just who I married? Those thoughts never came with bitterness. But they came. And they stayed. The irony is that, over time, I became the finance person for everyone I knew. When my sister's husband passed, I helped her refinance the house. When the church needed to track tithes, they came to me. When our son opened his first business, I built him a budget from scratch in pencil, by hand, and he still calls it his Bible. I never got the desk or the title or the pension. But I got a kind of quiet authority. Not the kind that comes from position. The kind that comes from being the one who knows. One day, years later, I ran into an old friend from school, Lorraine. We were both in our 60s by then. Gray hair, swollen ankles, still trying to find sensible shoes that didn't make us feel like we'd already given up. She had worked for the city for decades, accounting department. She always was good with numbers, too. Over lunch, she asked if I ever regretted not doing more with my mind. That was how she said it, your mind. I surprised myself when I said, I did more than most people know. Then I told her. About the interview. The skirt. The silence. She listened, then nodded. They did that a lot back then. We sat with that sentence like it was a monument to something we couldn't name. Now that I'm older, the world looks different. Girls go to school now expecting to work. Not until they get married, but regardless of it. They become engineers, pilots, doctors, coders. I see young women walking into buildings like the one I visited in '56, and I wonder if they know who they're carrying with them, the ghosts of women who stood just outside the door and knocked, softly, politely, and were told they were too late before they even arrived. Sometimes I want to stop them and say, make sure they know your name. But I don't. They already do. My granddaughter once asked me, Grandma, what did you want to be when you were little? I told her the truth. I wanted to be someone who mattered. She smiled and said, you are. And I believed her. But I also looked at the closet that night, at the back corner where an old navy skirt still hangs, and I thought, maybe I was more than I gotta be. But I was never less than I dreamed. I was 82 the day I took the skirt down from the hanger. It was late March. The kind of day when the snow has mostly gone, but the wind still tries to convince you it hasn't. The kind of day when you wake up missing something you can't quite name. I hadn't touched that skirt in years. Hadn't even thought much about it lately, not in a painful way. Just like a photo in a frame that no longer stings. But that morning I opened the closet and there it was, just waiting. It looked exactly the same. The navy fabric still held its shape. The hem still sat just below the knee. The zipper was a little stiff, but it moved. And to my surprise, it still fit. Well, almost. I'd lived a full life. Let's just say it fit enough. I wore it that afternoon. No occasion. Just to sit by the window with a cup of tea and remember. At some point I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. And I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Not the girl who went to the interview, she was gone. But not quite the old woman I saw most mornings either. No, this version of me was someone in between. Someone who'd carried her disappointments gracefully. Someone who'd made peace with what was lost and found something richer in what remained. I never told my children the full story. Oh, they knew I worked at the library. They knew I helped pay for school clothes and summer camps. But they didn't know about the interview. Or the man in the gray suit. Or the sentence that closed a door before it was ever opened. But I told my granddaughter. She was 20, home from college for spring break, sitting at my kitchen table scrolling through her phone like her thumbs were keeping time. She was telling me about an internship she might take in finance, of all things. She was nervous. Thought she wasn't qualified. Thought she might not belong. I smiled and said, you remind me of someone. That's when I told her everything. The letter. The skirt. The day. The silence. The job I almost took. She didn't interrupt. Didn't pity me. Just listened, the way only someone who loves you can. When I finished, She sat for a long time. Then she said, "Grandma, you were so ahead of your time." And I laughed. A real one. Because for so long, I'd felt like I was behind my time. Or just outside of it. But maybe she was right. Maybe I was just waiting for the world to catch up. A week later, she asked if she could borrow the skirt. She was going to a mock interview event at school and wanted something classic but strong. She tried it on, and it fit her perfectly. She twirled in the hallway, laughing, and I swear for a moment the room turned blue like it did in 1956. When she left that day, she kissed my cheek and said, "I'm going to wear it into the room like I own the place." And I whispered, "You do." That night, I wrote her a letter. Not because I had anything specific to say, but because I wanted to leave something for her that wasn't a story retold in passing. I wrote, "My darling girl, if ever you're told you can't do something because of who you are, a woman, a wife, a mother, too old, too soft, too bold, you remember. Someone before you was told the same." And she kept walking. This skirt isn't magic, but it's made of all the things I couldn't say out loud. And now it's yours. Love, Grandma. I slipped the letter into the pocket of the skirt. Didn't tell her. Let her find it when she was ready. I've come to believe that the lives we almost lived are still part of us. Not as regrets, but as layers. They shape the way we see the world, the kindness we offer others, the courage we grow into, the dreams we hand down like heirlooms. I didn't become an executive. I didn't sit at a boardroom table. But I raised 3 children who never doubted a woman's intelligence. I mentored 5 library assistants who now run entire systems. And I sent one bright, brave girl into a room wearing a navy blue skirt and her grandmother's full story stitched into every seam. That's not failure. That's legacy. Sometimes I still walk past the closet and brush my fingers across the empty hanger. Not with sadness, not anymore, but with a kind of tenderness. Like thanking a friend for standing by quietly all these years. People ask, sometimes, what I think has changed for women over the decades. And I always say, almost everything. Then I pause, smile, and add, but we still have to fight for it to stay that way. Because for every girl walking into her first interview with stars in her eyes, there's still someone looking to dim them. And for every door that opens now, we must remember the ones that didn't. Not to mourn them, but to honor the women who knocked anyway. And if someone asks about that skirt one day, I hope my granddaughter says, "Oh, this old thing? It belonged to a woman who never let silence define her." And then she'll walk forward, like I always hoped I would. And maybe that will be the job she does take.